this is Tony Speaks, and this is my lovely wife, Kim. We are the founders and co-creators of the lifestyle brand and podcast, Becoming Disciplined. Every week we meet, learn from, and share best practices with highly disciplined men and women from a variety of fields and endeavors.
Follow us on our journey.
Veteran outdoors author William W. Forgey, MD, is a full-time practitioner of family medicine and is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the International Association for Medical Assistance to Travelers, a Fellow of the Explorers Club, and a past president of the Wilderness Medical Society. He is the author of many wilderness medicine and camping books, including Wilderness Medicine and Basic Illustrated Wilderness First Aid. He is a Vietnam veteran, a former instructor at the JFK Center for Special Warfare, and was awarded a Bronze Star and Army Commendation Medal. Acting as the medical advisor to health teams on over 40 trips to Haiti, Dr. Forgey's team responded to epidemics of cholera, Zika, and chikgungya, as well as treating multiple other infectious diseases. But this week, Dr. William W. Forgey is becoming disciplined. Today on Becoming Disciplined, we interview Dr., veteran outdoorsman, and author William W. Forgey. Welcome to Becoming Disciplined. We are so honored to have you.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today.
All right. Well, Dr. Forgey, before you educate us and share your current story, we believe that all superheroes have an origin story. In the comic books, that's how it goes. If you could share your origin story, where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
Well, I was raised in Gary, Indiana, which is a steel working area of northern Indiana. My father worked in an oil refinery. My mom worked in a clothing store downtown. And I went K through 12 at a high school in Gary, Indiana, graduated in 1960. And then I went to Indiana University for 4 years, graduated with a degree in chemistry. Then I volunteered for the Army because now you're taking us to 65, which is the start of the Vietnam problem. And there was a heavy draft on. So I figured, well, plus I was out of money. So I got to college anyway, but then that was it. So I enlisted and went to OCS, which is a part of an enlistment plan they had. They call it College Op OCS. So you go to basic and AIT infantry, then you go to infantry OCS. So I got my commission in the infantry. And then I was assigned randomly after graduating OCS to a psychological operations unit at Fort Bragg. And you spend 1 year stateside, and then you rotate to Vietnam in that era, which is what I did. So I spent my time in Vietnam in the same business, psychological operations. I ended up spending 30 months total time in Vietnam. I came back to Bragg as an instructor at JFK Center for 6 months in PsyOps. And then I went into med school, years of med school, 4 years, 2 years of grad work, and then I became an emergency room physician for 5 years. And then I went to private practice. Then 10 years ago, I was, one of my patients was elected sheriff of Lake County, Indiana, and he talked me into agreeing to become medical director of the jail. So at that point, I became full-time medical director of a 1,050 inmate maximum security prison. Whole different life. However, but that's my life in a nutshell. Now, the other part of the nut is that I used to do an awful lot of wilderness travel and outdoor travel and international travel as part of my occupation. I had a family physician practice, but I was a very heavy travel medicine practice. I gave out, of course, yellow fever shots and all types of stuff. And basically, however, traveled to many of the places in the world that my patients are going. So I've had on-ground experience in Africa and Asia a lot, and South America places. So I was able to basically have a pretty good feel for what people were getting into, whether they were doing sophisticated business travel or backpacking, adventure travel. And those are quite different animals. And I was very active in major international organizations that dealt with travel medicine. And nationally, I eventually became president of the Wilderness Medical Society, which really is an international group of people interested in remote area care. And I've been on the board of directors of an international medical organization that deals with infectious disease and travel medicine issues for almost 30 years. So my practice, while it seems constrained, naming a family physician, I'm still dealing with a lot of peculiar international travel issues, and that was my life in a nutshell.
That's very good. It's you seem like you're the world. What's that commercial? The world's most interesting man. You seem like you've done it all.
Well, I was blessed that I got to do a lot of things, and I structured my life so I could do it. You know, a physician can be really tied down to the practice. And I was private, so that means you're either seeing patients or you're not making money. And you've got ongoing expenses. You're going to have your office staff, your yellow page ads, or whatever. You know, all that goes on. And all this guys picking up the laundry. Nothing stops. But you leave for a few weeks. So whenever you leave, you take a hit financially. So I always planned for the day I started my practice. Actually, I went to the ER for 5 years. I said, my contract, I want a month off in the winter, a month off in the summer. So because I was really interested in Arctic stuff. So I wanted to do a lot of winter Arctic work and plus the summer. I love the summer in the north. So I did it. And that was part of my insistence. So when I go into private practice, now the hit's very personal. Now you don't work, you don't get paid. So I planned that I'd be gone 6 weeks a year. So now my trips aren't long. I can't go for 2 months at a time, which I was doing before I started the ER. I'm stuck now. But what I could do would be part of expeditions. So I was a physician for expeditions where I would join and leave. And some of these expeditions lasted several years. So I kind of pop in and out, you know. Place in the middle of nowhere, I would join for a while or be involved in them setting up a major expedition and help with the launch, maybe join at the end or join. I did that a lot. And my travel was very interesting because I'm dealing with interesting people. I might be doing physical exams in a person that's, you know, elderly guy who's traveling intercontinentally by canoe. You know, I've done that.
Right.
And diagnose things and figure out how to get it treated and not let the expedition falter. So it's been interesting. I've made it interesting. In other words, I took what could be, a 12-hour a day plus office job and turned it into a more interesting occupation.
Now, I hear two vocations in your bio and your voice. If you had one choice for the rest of your life, would you practice medicine or explore nature? If money wasn't an option.
Alex, practice medicine. Medicine's
Okay.
great. That's the greatest adventure on the planet. I mean, you are really, most things are very mundane. Most problems people come with. I remember a doctor telling me at one time that 90% of anything that comes in the door is going to fix itself without you doing anything. About 15% of the time, you make a difference. And 5% of the time, no matter what you're going to screw it up. You're going to make so be aware. You're up to creation here. You're accomplishing very little.
Right.
There's a few times that your interdiction actually means a lot. It means a lot to people coming to you. They're spending the money, they're seeing you, you're doing something for them. But does it really mean anything in the timeline of their life? Probably not. You know, you didn't save their life. They were going to get over whatever. In fact, one of the things in your private practice, someone calls in and says they're sick, you better get them that day because in 3 days they'll be well.
Right.
And I'm going to take credit for what happens, right? But practicing medicine's emotional. You are involved in people's that 5% of the time or that 15% of the time. I mean, it's impressive. I mean, you're making huge differences, or you're failing to do something that's phenomenal, and it's very very it's an incredible occupation. So because when I was in Vietnam, I said, you know what, screw all this career. I'm going to become a doctor, and so I just had that moment where I'm going to do it. I don't care how hard it is to get in med school. I'm just, I'm changing my occupation, and so I did.
Mm-hmm. Now, what habits or disciplines are needed to make a great physician?
Well, I think there's a few things I try to talk to medical students about, that they're all stars in the, stars in their eyes, happy they got in. You float on air when you're admitted to med school. There are all types of reasons to want to go. Maybe it's a family tradition, maybe God knows. But somehow you get there. When you finally get there, you really walk in quite thrilled. Now there's a matter of a reality. And I like to say, there's certain things you haven't thought of, and you've got to balance your life. And one of them, you're going to have a family. They have a spouse, and boy, that's successful marriages are difficult in the medical field. It can happen, but it's not done in any field. It's work. And in the physician field, it's potentially challenging, in my opinion. But be balanced in that. And now how do you? So some of the challenges, for example, in the old days, you've got meetings. You're seeing patients all day, and then you're required to be on a certain number of staff meetings at the hospital. So you're off for that. And there'll probably be dinner at those things. They only serve, the cafeteria from the hospital serves dinner. Nothing big, but still nice. But the thing is, you're gone all night. and that, what is that? Maybe a meeting a week. So you start stacking up that nonsense. So maybe you're going to be on a volunteer board or something. Pretty soon you're not home at all. So disaster. So part of that whole discipline is looking at that spousal and familial responsibility. And then you've got to look at your financial situation. Financing is one of the best, the most difficult disciplines on the planet, to be financially disciplined. In other words, how much debt can you afford? And when you get out of med school and you get that first contract, I've seen kids do this when they got out of OCS and suddenly got their commission. I go down and buy an MG, a sports car, and you just, well, okay, you can't do that. You've got to. So suddenly now you're in a different social structure. You're a doctor, and now maybe your spouse wants to join the country club. You've got some financial things that you better think through, because there's troubled times ahead, and it's. And you probably are saddled with a debt that's astronomical. Some of these kids that get out of med school, they have a $200,000 debt. That'll suck you dry. So how are you going to then? So you have a spouse that has helped you get through med school, or has been with you maybe through some of the undergrad work. The great goal has been reached. You get your residency, but you owe $200,000. You can't enjoy anything for a long time. So, but be ready for it. If you're ready for it, you say, this is what it's going to look like, and stretch it out. But what can we do to enjoy ourselves? I always like that saying that the life should be about the journey, not the destination. You've got to enjoy, you've got to take comfort and enjoyment out of that struggle. And so part of that whole discipline of finance is figuring out how you can enjoy it, but still meet these responsibilities. The amount of study required. And one of the fun things, once you get out of med school and get into some of that other testing you have to do, is that you can read what you want to read. And now you can read anything. I was always big on history, but you really can't do it when you're in med school and you're doing so much of this other study that you have to do. So you can read anything, but there is a discipline to studying, and that you would not get that far if you hadn't figured that one out. But that's tough for kids to learn that when they're grade school, late grade school, to get into that discipline of study. And it is, my mom and dad had, they pound it, So it's good to have parents have discipline, because, it made me learn my spelling lessons and they found out I was getting a little behind in math. Boy, there I was with the flashcards around the kitchen table when they got off work. And so that learning discipline, and then also kind of figuring out the only way I'm going to amount to anything is probably using my brain. So I better figure out the skills that I need or where I'm going to go to do it. I mean, you could have that same with an athlete. You realize, hey, for me to accomplish it, I got to develop a skill or this skill. And then you put your energy, maybe not so much into your flashcards or math, but you need a certain amount of it. You want to maybe get into college or go further with your sport, but you're going to need a certain amount of knowledge, but you've got to hone that athleticism. I've traveled internationally with some world-class athletes, and the discipline and the lifestyle they have is more severe than anything I went to with med school. So athleticism, anything requires that discipline. But for school, then again, you get back then as far as this life and the discipline of it, besides your financial family and the fact you've got the work, depending on the job you choose, and that could direct where you want to go in medicine. If you want finite hours, you're going to pick a career path, maybe anesthesiology, where you've got finite hours you work and you're not on call. But you got this where, in my mind, I was on call all the time, go to the hospital all the time. So that interferes with a lot of social activities.
Right.
But then you have people replace you when you're gone, and that was the other big thing. You need that time off. You need that ability to relax and give. For me, it was adventure in the wilderness, but it's also that downtime. To me, that was downtime. Wilderness activity, international, interesting stuff,
Sure,
was part of what kept the rest of it working.
sure.
But I did it so much that I made a name for myself. And I realized that certain patients would leave me because I'm gone 6 weeks a year. If they happen to need you twice in a year or 3 times a year and happen to be when you're gone,
Right.
to them. So I lose patients. I figured, well, not only do I lose income of 6 weeks a year, I'm going to lose about maybe 15% of my patient load. But because I was popular, I had no problem replacing those people. I mean, I was working 9-hour days, and I was willing to not work 10-hour days, and
Right.
lost patients because of this schedule, and it was always scheduled. I never took more, but I didn't take less.
Doctor, I've noticed I've had to shepherd 2 parents through. I've had to see 2 parents pass in the medical system.
Yeah.
And I've also, through church affiliations, I've had to be at the bedside of a lot of people who passed. And I noticed something about you, that you're a people person and that you kind of are engaging with folks. But I have noticed a lot in the medical community where some doctors, they're very detached, and some of the things that they say and do can kind of be devoid almost of humanity. I hate to say that. But my question, I guess, is, have you noticed it in the medical? I guess I have a 2-part question. Have you noticed that in the medical community? And then do you think it was your military experience that made you different, or you think you were just made different than a lot of doctors that are out there?
So I noticed in my medical school class that a lot of the kids there were what I considered academic closet cases. They basically studied, and they studied fanatically, and they were really not necessarily weren't people. And as you get into the occupation and you start looking at the profession when they're advanced, say the surgeons, the various types of surgeons, there does seem to be certain types of people gravitate to certain parts of medicine. And for example, when you see an orthopedic surgeon, you almost bet that person, that man or woman, was an athlete.
Okay.
A kid, and they liked their doctor. They got interested in orthopedics. It just, now eye doctors haven't all been hit in the eye, but eye surgery is very peculiar. The people in it tend, it's the most advanced medicine and surgery in the planet. They're doing things that are fantastic.
Wow.
So you just see people, I don't know, they gravitate toward, that fine, things. You see, I had a lot of surgeons tend to be more technicians. They go in, they do the job, and they really don't necessarily do well with people. Now, if you're going to be a Hollywood plastic surgeon, you're going to have a good bedside manner.
Right.
You're gonna be like a lawyer. You're gonna have to sell yourself, right? That's the guy for me. He's gonna get he's gonna fix my nose. I want that guy, right? And so certain doctors have to be salesmen. The family doctor has to be a humanist and a humanitarian. Now, if you get jaded, that'll show up. You for now. I mean, it will show up.
Sure.
You can't get worn out. But I always enjoyed it. I remember when I was at the ER, I would leave at 9 o'clock, and we had a team of other doctors that came in at 9. And I would hear some of them interacting with patients as I was overlapping. And the guy would say, come in at 9 o'clock or so with a bad cold, and the doctor would berate them and say, why are you for a cold? Well, in my opinion, a guy wants to spend that money to come in. Why is he doing it? Because he's working, he's got other things, and he's got to keep going, cold or not. And plus, he's worried that he's got something worse than a cold. He's for a reason.
Right.
But, some of these guys are such big shots, like, if I have to crack your chest and put a tube in, that's good. But if you come with a cold, screw you. Well, no, that's not the job. Right. The other thing you can get in trouble with, I think, as a doctor, is getting mad at the patient. For example, you see a person who had, an alcoholic. So I treat an awful lot of alcoholism here, and the same guys come in over and over, and they're nearly dead, and you got to get through it. And then it can get you mad when they come back. But you know what? It's not our job to judge people. Our job is to repair them. Now, you tell them how not to get in that mess, but if they go and get in the mess anyway, fix it again. Not job, but I see doctors get mad at them. I had an orthopedic team I did some rotations with once in southern Indiana. They refused to take care of motorcycle victims. They said, if you rode a motorcycle, screw you. I'm not taking care of you. And that's, they were, and I said, well, what? The guys all busted up, but they didn't like it. Yeah, so you get doctors that can become a problem, but they're unhappy, or they figure out what makes them happy, and then they have their practice. But to be a family physician, you've got to be pretty broad spectrum in what you find in your level of tolerance. One of the biggest problems that happens is people trying to use you. Come to you and want the Vicodin prescription. Well, maybe they need it, and maybe they don't.
The next 1 minute and 33 seconds will be reserved for a commercial advertisement.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is in your time zone. At least on my time, it's after church, and I don't know about you, sometimes after church I'm just lacking energy. Courtney.
Yes?
Can you get me a one of them vitamins that your mama takes?
Here you go, Daddy.
Let me try one of these. Tastes pretty good.
My God, Kim! What do you have in there? It's made with vitamins B9 and B12. It's great for my overall health. It's made with pectin, a unique fiber in fruit peels. It's simple and delicious. Kim, did you know that more people search apple cider vinegar in the U.S. than tea? Google has 15,000 people searching that word every day in the U.S. alone.
Kim, how can more people get this gummy?
If you want to support the podcast, or if you're looking to improve your health, you can order these gummies at https://go.goli.com/becoming-disciplined. Don't forget to use our promo code Becoming Disciplined.
You know, people are or they're coming to you for a work release.
Right.
Maybe it's valid and maybe it's not. Now you got to become the police chief for the school system, writing notes for kids. I mean, for some doctors that irritates them. Or you come in with their sick pay form and it's 3-page or maybe 12 pages long.
Wow.
I don't consider that as amusing. I sit there and fill it out. I may not give you an hour behind, but I'll fill the damn thing out. But the thing is, it's just part of the job. And that's important to that person. Now, if I don't agree that they need it, it could be a hard ass. But I mean, you got to look at it from a compassionate viewpoint. What's going on here, and know that your time's being your schedule's screwed up, and now you're filling out this work release form, or it's and doctors that quit over that. I have seen that, and they burn out. They burn out because of paperwork. They burn out because they have to call an insurance company and get permission for medicine.
Wow.
It really irritates you. Or to try to get an MRI, and then once you do, I'll do this first and do that. All these phone calls. To me, it's just, well, there you go. You got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you could time travel and advise young William Forgey before he deployed to Vietnam, he's getting off the plane in Vietnam, or he's getting off the chopper in Vietnam, what would you tell him?
I wouldn't want to interfere with the fabric of time. I was so bloody lucky. I wouldn't do anything. I mean, I would scare me. It scares me to some of the opportunities I had that I did not take, that I'm glad I didn't take. I could have had any number of good things or terrible things could have happened, but it turned out as well as it did. And how blind, bloody luck.
Wow.
You got to be ready to seize opportunities, but so much of what happens is just is having mentors that pop up in your life. I had them in the Army. I had wonderful people all through my life that just seemed to kind of be there, and it's huge. And yet, where would you be without that? I mean, I think people are highly successful lose track of the fact that they didn't get there based on their innate ability. A lot of it is that luck of intersection of humans. And then what your job is to provide that intersection for others. And try to pass that on. And I've tried to do that. But, and sometimes you really worry when you do that because you wonder. I mean, one of the greatest nightmares of my life was one of my friends. I used to race bicycles in college. So, a little 500, we call this a bike race in IU. And that's a very big dedication. You're riding 35 miles a day and 100 miles on every weekend day.
Wow.
Every Sunday. And you're doing it for years because this is a big deal. Well, one of the kids that became a good friend of mine, he's a little bit younger than me. I got in that college op OCS thing and I said, Jerry, that's what you ought to do. Well, I thought he had died in Vietnam. I said, if I talked him into going there as a college op OCS and he got killed, because there is a pretty high casualty rate in young officers over there. When I went to the wall, and it took me a while to go to the memorial wall in Washington, I looked for his name, couldn't find it. And then I have to tell you, about 6 months ago, I found him. He's alive. He didn't go in the Army. Oh my advice. But I had worried about him, not all my life, but every now and then I think of this poor guy. I think, Jesus, I wonder what did happen to him.
Wow.
But for a long time, I thought he'd gone in, and I couldn't, had all this contact with him, and just poof. Even when I came back from Vietnam, I visited him and his family in New Hampshire. I mean, but also all contact was lost. He died or something, and he moved, and I thought, oh, why? I wonder. It's three things like that. So necessarily trying to help people doesn't mean you've really helped them. But it does. But in my life, I've given a lot of people a lot of advice, and it kind of weighs on you because you hope you're correct.
That's good. That's good. It's probably the most intelligent answer I've ever heard when I asked that question. You learned psychological operations in the military. Are there any takeaways from that training that you found helpful in your everyday life, or that my audience could find helpful?
Well, it oddly enough, it did. I mean, psyops is fascinating, and it was in its crudest form. You have a military operation, you go and you drop leaflets on them and say, hey, you want more of that? If you don't, give up. Or you're telling them what to do, or you're telling them why you did it. Very crude. But in the proper hands, psyops is more important than military action. And actually in Vietnam, it became kind of an emphasis because there's about a 10-to-1 kill ratio in Vietnam of Americans versus the enemy. That meant for every 10 enemy who gave up, we saved 1 American. We also kind of saved 10 enemy too, but the thing is, you saved 11 lives, but 1 was an American. And no way of knowing what the wounded deal would be. So psyops did have its emphasis because of that. And so we had this program of True Hoi program of giving up. And that's as opposed to Hoi Chan, which is prisoner of war. Different. Capturing is different than giving up. And so, but what are the basics of it? Well, it's very complex. It's color imaging. It's all types of stuff that goes into language and differences in culture. And it has meant a lot to me. It caused me, plus my travel, to be very, very aware of cultural differences. They're immense. It just completely surprises you. And that's what you really teach early on psyopers and civil affairs people. Hey, in that culture, this means this. Don't cross your legs in front of or watch, shaking with your left hand if that's your butt wiping hand. All this nonsense. But it's cultural. But there are fine points in American culture. Certain things you don't do with other people, or you're aware of why they do what they do. And you become culturally aware. So the biggest thing in psyops is culturally aware. Then the other's got to be the medium, the method of giving a message. Sometimes it's best to call someone. Sometimes it's best to put on an email. Sometimes it's best to keep your mouth shut. But the message, how it's delivered, I've used that to great advantage. And when I don't pay attention to it, at my peril. So you kind of learn a lot about presentation, and how important just stupid things are, but they mean a lot.
Sure. Now, as someone
pretty darn interested. And the other thing, you can't go to a more interesting reunion. Veterans cannot go to a more interesting reunion. For one thing, we've been able to accumulate younger soldiers in there. So the men and women that are in the current active military are members of this organization. It's a Psychological Operations Veterans Association. We're inviting them to active duty. And we have roundtables. I mean, most of these, it's not like a drunken blowout at all. I mean, we basically they'll have someone there that was at Kosovo and what happened there and how the radio stations are doing this, all this incredible stuff. And obviously, with the Twitter and all that is psyops. That is psyops on steroids.
Right.
Stuff and figuring out who people are and who their friends are and who their friends are, and what they think about, what type of fashions do they like? It doesn't seem like it's related to politics, but it eventually does all slurp together, right? And that's all psyops basically. And so psyops is incredibly important. Now, who controls it? Well, the military does not. The military psyops is very restricted in who they are, the audiences. But the concepts of psyops are not restricted, and so it's a very interesting thing. It makes you aware of what's going on in these other, like these public influencers and everything. It makes you aware of the power, the advertising power, and the political action power, and the social activation power, the ability for it to do it, danger of them doing it. It just lays it in front.
That's powerful. That's powerful. As someone who served in Vietnam, is there a movie, book, or documentary that gets it correct? And let me share why I asked that question. I was in the DC area when the DC sniper was killing people.
Yeah.
And it had there were several of them that kind of came close. So when the movie came out, it was really annoying to me because the movie got a lot of things wrong.
Yeah.
So is there a movie that you've ever watched about Vietnam where you're like, they nailed it, they got it right?
So so everybody's story is going to be different. And I have friends that, I have a good high school, grade school friend who went OCS before me, who won a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars with Valor. One of those Bronze Stars was in the battle that a movie that was eventually made called We Were Soldiers. It starred Mel Gibson, I think.
I think that's it. Yes, sir.
Was it called We Are? It was about the battle of the Khe Sanh Valley.
Yes, sir.
No, the A Shaw Valley. It was the A Shaw Valley battle. And that, he liked that movie. He was one of the lieutenants in the movie. He was a lieutenant that was in that movie. I mean, it was played by someone else, obviously. But that was not my experience. But he liked it. Then I had a buddy who's a special forces guy who was in Vietnam, but just recently retired. And I think he liked Full Metal Jacket, and I didn't like it at all. But it wasn't my experience in Vietnam. But I thought there were some unrealistic things in there that made no sense to me. When I first saw Apocalypse Now, I hated it. And then as I re-look at it, I kind of like it. I think some of it is just, I hated it when I first saw it. But then now I don't hate it. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay.
Tough, aren't they? Books. So I've been more interested in the books and the theory. I think there is a very good, boy, I wish I remember. So there's an officer who is a Marine officer, and it was his book, which is out in Amazon, is called Just Bury Him. That's the title, Just Bury Him. It's one of the most shocking books you can read. And what was shocking to me, in part, was the lack of, this was 3rd MAF, he's in 3rd Marine Amphibious Force up in I Corps, belonging to DMZ, and they could not get uniform parts. They couldn't get their boots. These were rotting off them. They couldn't get resupplied.
Wow.
Scott figured out that at the military depot there in I think in Benoit, that you could, I don't know if he was near Natron, but if he was in Flycore, he had to be at Benoit. So he was sending a guy in, they'd go there to the morgue, because they stripped those uniforms off and throw them in a pile. And he was filling a truck with these uniforms and these dead guys and hauling them back. He did it twice. And I think the 3rd time he got caught and he threatened to court-martial the kid, so he had to get him out, and that stopped it, and he got in trouble for it. Wow. These dead guys. That's how desperate, how poorly run the Army and the Marine Corps was at all levels. By that, I mean this poor guy helping his kids, but he also talked about some of the stupidity of the orders. Yeah, and it's just like, it makes you sick. And that book is a good one. Just Bury Him.
Now, you were also an action officer at the Pentagon. What advice would you give to a young action officer listening today to make their tour in the 5-sided puzzle palace a little easier?
Well, I was a reserve officer, and I had a designation called a MOPDES, Mobilization Designate. I don't even know that exists now, but what it was in case there was a national emergency, even undeclared, if I thought there was a national emergency, I was immediately going to the Pentagon. No orders needed, just show up. And then they'd deal with it later. But the deal was, I was activated once a year, and I could be activated for almost as much time as I had off from these various projects I had, med school and everything, in grad school. And so I was assigned a particular office, the same office that I had gone from Vietnam there on liaison trips too, and it's all about psyops. But it was beyond psyops, but it was really mostly psyops. And so you're just basically like a paralegal. Yeah. The guy I replaced was a GS-13. So it's almost like a brigadier general, but he's a civilian. But he was the guy in charge of making all these moving parts. And when he was gone, because I'd been with him so much, Vietnam, back and forth, and I knew his field. He trusted me. He'd take off for weeks, and then I'd be there. But that's kind of like being a paralegal. But you're at a DOD level, or in that case, D8, Department of Army level. But it wasn't. But the thing that was fascinating me later was finding out how much I knew before other people knew it. For example, when they resumed the bombing in North Vietnam, I knew about it months before the bomber pilots. They knew about the morning before. That morning. And we knew because we were putting things in place, but it was top secret. But all this top secret stuff. But most of the stuff that's top secret doesn't really go anywhere. I mean, it's stuff that's interesting, but what does it mean? Nobody knows until later. Oh yeah, well you should. That was more important. But you meet a lot of interesting people, and hear these stories, and it's just part of your life, But I think the advice there is, well, one, the only embarrassment I had is one of the superior officers wanted to borrow my comb one day. And I'll tell you, I've never had a dirty comb on me since. And it's just mostly, it's like being in an office. You're in an office, obviously, but it helped me in my life because I'm in a peculiar situation. Here I work where I'm working in a jail, and above me is a warden, and above him is the sheriff. Would I go to the sheriff with a problem? Oh, hell no. No.
Right.
I'm going to go to that ward. Well, being in the military for so long, I could come in this job as a civilian. I've been a doctor for 30 some years, big shot doctor. Come in here. I know exactly how to behave. Yes, I've been in a similar situation. So you just pay attention to the chain of command, and then you have to figure out how to do things you're not supposed to do, but need to be done. But no one's going to give you permission to do it. And so those are those career breaking things. They're either going to make you or break you. If they break it, you're done. But if they do it, you might get a Bronze Star out of
it. Now you're also known as an adventurer. What are 3 places in this world that you recommend that everyone should see before they leave this earth? Because you've traveled the whole globe.
Well, my favorite city in the United States is Bayfield, Wisconsin. And Bayfield's right on the edge of Lake Superior. And there's the Apostle Islands are right there. So depending on whether you like the wilderness, but it's a soft wilderness because you're only about 70 miles from Duluth, which, Duluth got everything that you want. And well, most things. And then you've got, it's kind of like a yacht base. It's got all the wealthy yachts. So that means you've got nice restaurants, right? So you got bears walking down the street, and you got wilderness. To me, it's kind of an intersect between civilization and wilderness. Bayfield, Wisconsin, I just love it. But internationally, Singapore is my favorite place. But things to see, it's so different for people. That's why if you really start traveling a lot, you end up having a whole bucket list, and they're radically different. Some will be beautiful or intriguing cities, and then there's going to be, of course, wilderness areas, which really depends on what you like. I tend to like the north. I thought I'd like jungle, and then I decided maybe jungle not, and so immediately after I got out of the Army, it was all northern forest, and northern forest is. Well, you just don't have quite the crap that you have in a jungle. You do have
amen.
mosquitoes. You got mosquitoes, you got black flies, and you got the no-see-em swarms, but they don't carry as much infection.
Sure. That's
so.
Good.
I mean, I love the North, but for telling people, I wouldn't presume to tell someone. But I would say that's part of that whole lifestyle thing where I hate it when people work all their lives and don't do the things they think they want to do or see the place. I think you should try to incorporate that into what, if possible. I know it's not. I mean, my God, when you're struggling to make a living, you're raising kids, how in the world are you going to get that trip to Ireland? You know, how are you going to do it? Well, guess what? Maybe you should drag them along. I mean, there are cheap. Somebody gets some really cheap tickets, and maybe it's just, maybe it's kind of worth it every 5 years to do something, or maybe every year, depending on what you're capable of doing.
Sure.
Figure that out. I think I did tell someone recently, or not so long ago, I don't know if I ever need to go anywhere anymore. I've got I've got this smart TV and we got Nat Geo. More than I want. There it is right in front of me. And then if I want to turn it, I want to put it on pause and go to the toilet. I got a nice flush toilet. I mean, what more can you want in life? You're in the Serengeti and you have a flush toilet.
Right. Now I got a tough question for you here.
Sure.
And normally, just so you know, even though I'm a religious man, I try to leave religion off of this podcast just because I want to be able to reach everybody. But you are unique because you're someone who has seen combat, you've seen a great deal of nature, and you're also someone who has an advanced knowledge of medicine and science.
Yeah.
So in your humble opinion, based on all you've seen, does the universe have a designer? Do you think we're designed, or you think that this was a product of random development?
Well, if I would think that if there is a designer, that designer would use natural phenomena to effect what needs to be done, what that designer wants done. So, you might regard yourself as like an ant sitting out there in your driveway walking along, and all of a sudden you come along and want to shine a magnifying glass at it and melt it, burn it. Well, it's going to have a hard time figuring out what exactly happened. It's going to have a hard time figuring out who did it to them. It's going to have a hard time figuring out how did it happen. They won't know any of those things. To even explain that this 8-year-old child wants to just try the magnifying glass, see if it'll burn an ant, would be hard for the ant to understand. So how do you think you're going to understand if there is a master designer that can control all that stuff, that you're going to know how to explain any of it? So I think science explains how things happen, but it may not explain why it happened. And that gets then beyond science's ability.
Okay. All right.
Phenomena, you see things happen. You can equate it back to string theory and formation of a Big Bang, but what happened before the Big Bang? I mean, you're just in a realm that goes on forever, but you're not going to know why it happened.
Okay. Now, what book, and we try to remove religious books from here, what book do you recommend as a veteran, as a doctor, as an outdoor adventurer? What book has had an impact on your life in a significant way?
I would say that, well, it depends on where I am at in my life and what my current problem is, or where I am and that's really tough to find. There are books I find fascinating. There's this, but it's just, again, it's a narrow section of my life. So I don't know if but it affects it. I'm a history buff because history repeats itself for a reason. People behave in ways. Civilizations behave in ways. It's just, there it is. It's been there before. And so if you get a good book on history, that to me, and that one that explains civilization as it goes. I mean, I don't know how you can judge anything if you can't read history. And I'll give you an example. There's a series of books out recently. I think I might have died. Who wrote them called, there's two on invasion, or shall we say the conquest of the New World. And it's the conquest in the voices of the persons who experienced it. So the first volume is about Columbus and Cortez. And then the next volume is about the conquest of Peru. Pizarro, and the various explorations to the United States. And when you read those things, holy Toledo! I mean, there's so much you learn about the original inhabitants and about these people, and that were the conquistadores, and it's just fascinating, and about themselves, and it's just about humanity. You go, wow. So you take a guy like Columbus, he could be completely down on the destruction. I mean, practically because of him, look what happened. The North American continent was practically denuded of humans. Millions died because of disease. Not exactly his fault, right? But then the Italians got tomatoes. The Irish got potatoes. I mean, these didn't exist over there. I mean, the impact of his original exploration, I'm staggered by the impact. I mean, everybody's been staggered. But you want to tear down, Columbus statues because he basically then caused, the conquest of the New World, the destruction of all the natives, maybe even the importation of slaves. Blame him. Well, the thing is, that guy was one hell of a navigator and a genius. And you see how he had to manipulate that ragtag group of guys he had and get them through those expeditions. That guy's incredible. He was something. Now, good boy, bad boy. I did stick that one in the corner. But so I think, you become less judgmental the more you know about the person doing something. And so I think the more you read about it, I mean, you could look at anybody in history practically, and if you read, the more you read about them, the less judgmental you can be about that person, with certain exceptions. Certain exceptions.
Right. Now, you recently wrote a book yourself, and can you give us the title of that book and tell us what inspired it?
Well, I've got about 30 books that I've published over the years, starting about 1970s, late 70s. I started writing on nutrition, and my book Wilderness Medicine came out in 1979. The 7th edition of Wilderness Medicine came out about 2017, I think. And then all types of other books followed. I had a book on campfire stories, several editions of those. I used to tell campfire stories of Boy Scouts, my scouts. And so I've got a lot of books. If you just Google, if you look at me on Amazon.com, you just see the current ones, and you see maybe these used ones out there. But so the one you're talking about, I think, is Prepper's Medical Handbook. And Prepper's Medical Handbook is basically, it's based on my Wilderness Medicine book, which was basically how do you handle, it's really for expedition medicine, that one. This is for people who are preppers. Now, the idea is you're going to be on your own if the grid goes down. You're on your own. So how do you get ready for that? Now, there's all types of things that you need to do. One thing, you're trying to be ready for food and water and all that. That's not covered in this book. This is about the medical aspects of prepping. Now, ideally, if you're a prepper, you will squirrel away some things that might be useful during this prepping event. And that would be certain medications might come in very handy, and various, things, but in most circumstances, in the wilderness, if you're entering a survival situation, some disasters cause it, which could mean losing your canoe and all your stuff, or it could be plane crashing, or it could be whatever. But you don't normally enter a survival situation in the wilderness intact. You're in the wounded, and probably with stuff missing. So what do you do then? How do you think in a wilderness survival situation? The prepper's in a different situation in some ways. I would think most prepping situation, you don't enter wounded, but you may enter it with your stuff gone. Could be a flood that takes it out, could earthquakes, all types of stuff. Or the grid just drops, and big power drop or whatever. Now you got no heat, no water moving, nothing happening, and then food chains block up, food disappears, and maybe medical care is overtaxed or doesn't exist. So now you got to handle yourself. That's kind of a different thing than the wilderness where you're backpacking the stuff in. Now you can have more stuff, if you're in a house. But what if you might think, gee, where I live could be a hurricane and I got to leave it? What can I take with me? So a prepper's got to think in two regards: of a permanent base camp situation, or the go bag, or the mobile escape bag. And what can I take with me in a finite length area of space? And then how long is that stuff going to last? And what do I do when it runs out? So you shouldn't go into an emergency situation with no supplies, but you may end up with no supplies. So what that means is, from a medical viewpoint, you're going to need to know how to diagnose a problem based primarily on symptoms. I'll be very little on the physical exam. You don't have a skill set there, but mostly on symptoms. On what would be ideal to treat it, and when should you, at all cost, if possible, return to the grid. If you can't return to the grid, what do you do now? But don't do it on your own if you could have returned to the grid. In other words, here's the common sense delineation. And the willingness to be, when do you fire off that radio signal for that $80,000 rescue? And when do you not? In the grid situation, it'd be, well, if for some reason you're off the grid, when should you return? Or there is no grid, well, that option's not there. Just here's what you're going to have to do next. Not the best problem, not the best, but maybe it'll work.
Sure.
Look.
Sure.
And so the big bulk of it is how to diagnose. And then it's, well, now what do you do with it? Now that you diagnose it, what do you treat it? And then what if you don't have anything left? Well, here's the best you can do.
Now, as someone who knows about prepping, but you also mentioned earlier about financial discipline, how do you find the balance of being prepared for that 1% chance of something going wrong, but then also you have the 99% chance that you got to balance your checkbook, you got to pay your bills, you got to stay current with your 401k, you got to do all of those other things. I just ask because I'm a person that likes to be prepared, but at the same time, I don't want to be so prepared that I go bankrupt going prepared.
Yeah.
So,
yes. And so I think for prepper, when it comes to the financial sliver of it, what you've got to do is set aside with each, not your 401k, you set aside a certain amount each time and have the discipline to do it. Now, it's tough. I mean, if you're barely making the rent and you're barely making food on the table, thinking that you're going to put something aside, but the problem you're going to have is eventually lights will be out. You will eventually not be able to get to work because you'll be sick for a week, 2 weeks, and so that food supply disappears. Well, it disappears. And I've spent a lot of time in places like Haiti. I've been in Haiti 40 times on medical service trips. There are people starving to death in places like that. I mean, literally. And in subsistence living, where you only have a day's worth of lentils left, it's hard to save for the future. Right. So to say save for the future, well, but if you see people living like that, you realize. So I think the best way, grocery wise, is you always buy two get one free, or buy one get one free, and then you start rotating your stock. I mean, you could without necessarily much more than you're spending on a week in an American situation, squirrel stuff away and then rotate your shelves.
Right.
Actually, I told someone the other day, I'm afraid that my kitchen cabinets might rip off the walls, because when COVID first got started, man, I went nuts on that, like everyone else. I have to tell you, when COVID first started, before it ever became known, I already had several cases of toilet paper.
Right.
I was ready for COVID. I didn't know COVID was coming, but man, I had the toilet paper. So bring it on. Bring on whatever you want. You don't worry about the Russians invading the East Coast. I mean, you got toilet. But it's just it's scrolling. Now I can't. So COVID's here. COVID's going to keep coming and going, and we're getting through the supply chain blocks. That's one of the good things that's happening now. I mean, hell, you used to be able to go in. I mean, you'd go into a store and it was empty. I mean, the shelves were bare. Now that is not the case. So we made great progress. Now it's expensive. The supply chain block hasn't broken down to the point where prices are dropping. I don't know if they'll ever drop, but I think we see progress in that area. So it is possible to squirrel away supplies now, even in this environment, And I think it's possible to squirrel away a certain amount of water. I always have these 5-gallon jugs of water. They're worth the investment, right? And then plus the normal water that you could buy really cheap. I mean, big gallons and too expensive. But I always have water, and and then of course I have medical supplies.
For someone with your experience, I wasn't going to ask this question, but I think my audience would want to hear from you, you being a veteran and all of your experiences in life. As a doctor and someone who knows about doomsday prepping, knows about preparation, and who has traveled to these these foreign lands and everything, what is your take on people who are vaccine hesitant? What is your thought on that?
Well, the most important thing for people is to know why things are being suggested, as opposed to becoming. And so if you don't know why something's happening, and this is true in the military. I mean, if you just have an army unit and you want them to assault the hill, and they don't know why they have to do it, and your only reason you're because you're being told to do it. So you have a well-disciplined society that just does what you tell them to do, like China. Well, that kind of works, but the better way is for them to understand why they're doing it. And you can get that. You can have a knowledge-based population that then instead of just telling them to do something, you can tell them why. Now, if they don't believe the data you're providing, you're kind of out of luck. If that becomes spooky to them, then you got a problem. And if you allow that to happen, and so what happened early in COVID was, I think we've always realized there would be some terrible pandemic that came along to be like the 1918 influenza pandemic. It was terrible. Now we're almost at the same death toll as we had in 1918, but our population was smaller then, so it had more of an impact on us then. And it also occurred only about a year and a half or so, or 2-year period, and that was over. This will go on for a long time. This particular thing, we knew something was coming, and but when it hit, it's such a shock that you because if you study history and pandemics. By the way, I do have a new book that's out now. I don't have a copy of it yet, but I know it's released now virtually on Amazon, at least the 1st of October. So maybe it will be out for a few weeks, and it's on pandemics. It's actually called The Prepper's Guide to Surviving Pandemics and Bioterrorism and COVID, because the publisher wanted me to do it. And it's actually an expansion of one of the chapters in the Prepper Medical Handbook. It's just that so you look at pandemics and how populations respond to them, it's virtually predictable what happens. What is a country going to do when something fierce hits its borders and starts penetrating that doesn't potentially destroy the society structure and the whole financial economic engine? There have been successful. When I say successful, some of the early epidemics in the Roman Empire, it practically destroyed the empire. Marcus Aurelius was emperor at a time when one of these major things hit, and 1/3 of the people died, and yet they survived. It survived through him because he did the things he needed to do to replace people in the administration. He had to basically take people who would never be allowed to be citizens and vote and made them citizens and gave them positions of power and structure. They replaced the dead people. That's what they did. And he kept the whole civilization. The empire survived years after him. The next big epidemic they did not have that structure in place and virtually collapsed. But you lose 1/3 of your population, it's hard to keep a civilization going. But Marcus Aurelius did it. What do? Well, it's going to require all types of things. And we started, with the closing of borders, but you can't close a border. Is it in the old days? Of course, they had quarantine. A ship come in, or you hear about an area that had plague, and you seal off, and any ships were kept out. But if one of those ships got on shore, then you're gone. Like there was a great plague in Marseille, and they had quarantine areas. But one of the ships, very powerful merchant, wanted his supplies off that ship. And it had been at a plague port before, and they knew it, and they had it isolated, but he had the power to get them unloaded. Boom. It just caused havoc in the number of dead people. So they had techniques that they sometimes failed to use. We have those techniques. We have better. What we have an advantage over the previous generations is we actually know what this germ is. We may not know how it got there. We may not know whether it got released on purpose or accidental. We may not know if we helped finance it. We don't know that. But we do know the germ. Right. And we know how it changes. And we do know how it spreads. And we do know how to decrease that spread. And we do know how to improve your ability to survive it if you catch it. One of those ways is immunization. So it's all a matter of risk management. Right? Being immunized, you will decrease your chance of being killed by it. Not entirely eliminate it, but you've decreased it. Right now, they're saying probably by a factor of 24 times. So that means people who get immunized will catch it and die. But you're 24 times more likely if you don't get the shot, if you catch it, to die. But your odds are enough to make you, some people want to get the shot and others not. So, and so we're getting the data out. Much of the most recent data comes from Israel because they immunized a large percentage of population, certain age groups, very early on with Pfizer, basically. And they messenger RNA type of vaccine, similar to Pfizer and Moderna. And now these people we've had a chance to see how long did that immunity last, how many of them got sick, and then Delta hit Israel. And then how do those people back from that era, either being ill or immunized, how are they doing with Delta? And what do you do to protect that population? So data's coming. When the publisher asked me to write that book, I said, you're asking me to write the history of World War II in February of 1943. We know how the war is going to come out. We just don't know a lot of the important details. We're going to win the pandemic, but it's going to hurt us for a long time. There'll be a lot of people die. I think now that we have good vaccines, you're going to see a lot of people die who didn't need to die. That's always a shame. But again, I work now in a medical group here, and I will say my office staff of 6 people who work for me, and they're not medical, they're secretarial. I think one of them's been immunized. The other 5 are afraid to get it. Now, I tell you, I got mine early on. And now nursing staff, I got a higher immunization rate. But these are people, now we've had one officer nearly die. He's on an extracorporeal bypass for weeks, and that's a heart-lung machine. Almost 10 days on that, but on ventilator for weeks and weeks. He lived through it. We've had a mental health person die, one inmate die, and we've had a bunch of get sick. And now we got a way of preventing it, where it gives you that giant percentage time. If it was twice as likely to protect, that's 100% improvement. This is not twice as likely. This is not 10 times. This is 24 more times likely to protect you from dying. So believe me, getting the shot will make sense for those that believe that is true and who also know that there is a risk you will get ill from the shot, but that the risk is greater from this damn disease. And this disease, I think there's only going to be one type of person in the United States eventually. They'll all be immunized, but it's either from catching the disease and surviving it or getting the shot. And it might be you're going to get to do both. You're going to get the shot and get sick. But maybe you'll still be here. So it's got to be two types of people, all of them immunized.
Right.
You don't escape this disease. You're not going to escape it. It's more contagious. This new Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox.
Wow.
I mean, if a kid walks in the room with chickenpox and you haven't had it, you're going to catch it. And that's this disease. So you're going to catch it. The only thing about flattening the curve, you remember all that chatter about flattening the curve early on, you don't want to overwhelm a hospital. If you do, you won't have enough beds to treat your cardiac patients, and you won't have enough beds to treat, you won't have enough oxygen. Places like India and Brazil, they ran out of oxygen. If you flatten the curve and people that don't want this shot will not hang out in crowds, they may not catch this disease for another 6 months or another year. And that means then there won't, if they all got in a big group together and hugged and kissed, boy, I'll tell you, in another few months, there won't be enough oxygen and enough beds. Just spread it out a bit. I mean, by that, if I spread it out, don't all get sick at once. If you don't all get sick at once, we'll be able to handle it with the oxygen. In Brazil, even they ran out of anesthetics, so they could intubate them, and they had the oxygen for it. They couldn't put you to sleep. You just had to struggle because they didn't have enough of the anesthetic. Wow. So just give the system a chance to handle the nightmare. And if you want to be part of the nightmare, just don't hang out in crowds for a while. Give us a chance to get through this little bubble we're going through now. Certain areas of the country, like right now, my hospitals are full. My one local hospital is on bypass, won't take an ambulance. The other is absolutely loaded, but will take patients. But if you're having a cardiac problem and you're in that other hospital, you're going to go a long way before you. And you're someone doing CPR on you, and it has to add another 15 miles to your trip. Well, you may not make that one. So the death rate will go up from all causes when you get into a mess where your hospital. So my plea is, if you don't get the shot, try to not catch the disease by staying away from other people. Mask cut it down some. Mostly it prevents the person with the disease spreading it to others, but to a percentage it prevents you from being it. So I talk in the book about a thing called the infectious disease, minimal infectious disease. You can take a certain number of germs. You could probably handle. So with COVID, we won't know the exact number yet, but we're getting so we can almost guess it. Maybe you could handle 30 at a breath. 30 is going in at a breath, may not bother you. It might be 10. If you have the shot, maybe you can handle 1,000 with a breath. So you just think, but you can still get it, but you maybe handle a larger load. So people are around you with it, you're less apt to get sick, and you might still get overwhelmed. And if you're wearing a mask, and I say I've got it, and I'm blowing out 10,000 at a time, and I'm knocking out 68%, and I got some, we got so many thousand, and then you're wearing a mask that cuts down a bunch, and then you've had the shot. Yeah, you're breathing some of that in. This is not all 100%. Might not get you sick. Don't have the shot. You might not get the load that makes you sick, but you might. But you're more apt. So everything's layers of protection. Layers of protection.
Amen. Well, I took the vaccine. And it sounds like you saying the stats are in the favor of the vaccine. But I guess my question, one follow-up question with that: do you have any concerns about the long-term effects of the RNA science, the RNA messenger vaccine?
I don't have any concerns about it, because the concern is the long-term side effects of SARS-CoV-2 or this disease in some people, and it's mostly the people that have got so sick they had to go to the hospital. Most people just mildly ill aren't necessarily having long-term effects. Some are, but some people are pretty darn sick too, and some people just mild. 40% of people don't even know they got it. That's not a bad disease. If you get it and not even know you have it, but that's what allows it to spread so much. But if you go to the hospital, about a third of those people have long-term effects, either inflammation, like a cardiac inflammation, or the brain fog, or a number of other things, and pulmonary primarily. So, and renal, kidney. But That disease is a bad one. We picked a bad one here. And yeah, there might, I think that we've got about so many millions of doses of the messenger RNA. Now, this messenger RNA has been used before in a vaccine. It was used in the Ebola vaccine, which, not many people got, but it was a big deal to interrupt some of the Ebola. And when you look at some of the biggest, most horrible plagues in history, some of those that knocked out like over a fourth of the population could well have been Ebola. Is not this thing that you don't worry about in our modern era. However, because we know what the germ is, we know how to spot it, we know how to isolate, and that's when you really do isolate people. We're not going to argue about that one. And even a layer of immunizations available for workers and people in contact. And it's a messenger RNA. The short answer is no, I'm not worried. Am I worried about, after my second shot, I broke out in shingles. That's being reported from the Israeli information. That's painful. I'm still numb. My shingles. Will I get my booster? Yep. Because this disease is really bad. And if you're really unlucky with a shot, some people will be, a tiny percentage will be. A much bigger percentage will be very unlucky with the disease. And they will catch it. It's got an R naught of 8. You're not going to avoid catching COVID. You're going to catch it.
That's good. That's good to know. That's good to know.
It's going to happen.
Well, Dr. Forgey, we can't thank you enough for coming on. You didn't have to do this. You didn't need to do this. We truly appreciate it. You have the last word. Do you have any closing thoughts for our audience? And typically, just so you know, our audience is 30 to 55-year-olds. I lovingly call them the Get Better Club because they're people who are trying to become a better version of themselves. Do you have any closing thoughts for our audience?
Well, I think the most important thing is to understand that you can always improve everything you do, but don't feel bad about not having. I have shortcomings, but I don't dwell on them because I have them. And I try to improve. And I realize I could have always done better. But I do think if I have one short thing to say is try to make the journey the important part of your life, not that end game. I hope that you can do those things right now as you struggle, just trying to survive day to day, to enjoy part of that day. I just hope you can. And often that is going to require a mental place that you go, a religious place or a mental place that you can be, because it is kind of hard otherwise, to gain that level of happiness in life.
If you enjoyed Dr. Forgey, you can read more about him and find his books at www.preppersmedicalhandbook.com.